Carol, I'm going to invite you to come on back up here. I want to ask a final question to this panel, though. And Dave, as the management guy, if you'd sort of squeeze on down there and make some room for Carol on the end. Yeah, just go walk in front of me here. No, that's all right. So here's the question I want to ask for the panel, which is, if we're going to do all of these things that we've just been talking about, who needs to be involved in order to make the arts successful in Atlanta? And what are the obstacles in our way? If we're to achieve this vision, who needs to be involved and what's going to keep us from getting to that vision?
My big three barriers are time, money, and leadership. And I think the challenge we have right now is leadership. We've got money going into arts and culture. We could use more. We've demonstrated over time we can build great institutions, and they're propping up all the time. What we don't have, if you will, is a leadership in the region that really says this is important as a region. We tend to be fragmented by our communities and our cities and our geographic boundaries, and yet art is very transportable. So until we start having a greater regionalism, there's that dirty word, that recognizes the value and content that we already have here and the leadership that steps up and do that, we're going to always wish we had more.
All right, so we need leadership, and what's going to keep us from achieving that is that we still have this lack of regional approach to these things. Okay, others?
I thought I had a different answer until I heard you speak, Carol. I think the key is what you mentioned about having artists at the table from the very beginning. We are very fortunate in Atlanta to have a very generous corporate philanthropic community, foundations. We've got a lot of support for the arts, not as much government as we would like, but we are not going to get it right if we don't have artists at the table from the very beginning. I just came back from a Young Audiences conference in New York, and one of the things that I realized being at this conference with other executive directors and board members and teaching artists, et cetera, is that I do my artsy things with my artsy friends, and when I'm at work, I'm wearing kind of a different hat, a nonprofit administrator hat. But the most powerful discussion I participated in at the conference was about leadership development and included board members, executive directors, teaching artists. And the teaching artist sitting next to me said, you know, we are never a part of these conversations with people like you, ever. And he had the most profound things to offer to the conversation and very different ideas that I thought was very inspiring.
Well, I think the arts in general has a perception issue that people think it's for the other. You know, and you're saying you're artsy friends, and I have those friends too. But it's not just art is for everybody, and it's not just about art, and it's not something that's just, as you said, Carol, for the 10%. It's about creativity. It's about how we make decisions, how we make things, how nimble are we. I think in the coming job market, being a nimble thinker is going to be increasingly important, and it's imperative too that we have kids at the table now. One thing we're talking about at ACP is having a youth advisory board. Kids are going to consume art and media in different ways, and how do we get young people to arts events? You know, a lot of times I'm in an arts event and, you know, everybody's my age, which is kind of boring. Not me, but, you know, some of them. But, you know, I think really looking at the youth and then sort of thinking about how do we rebrand art. I think when you talk about arts and culture, a lot of people think, well, I don't draw, I don't paint, that's not me. But art is for everybody. It's about creativity. It's an innovation driver. And I think we need to rebrand and have a different discussion about what art is.
Yeah, if I could just add something, and I want to get the mayor to comment a little bit on this too, but it was another mayor in Gwinnett County, Bucky Johnson, who used to be the director of music at Georgia Tech. And Bucky told me something really interesting. There's a huge percentage of those engineering students at Georgia Tech who play musical instruments. And he said there must be something between those parts of the mind that engineers, for whatever reason, are much above the national average. At least those who go to Georgia Tech are much above the national average in musical ability, which is a surprising thing to find out.
Well, it's not only that, it's also, you know, at Turner we've been trying to put, you know, creative people with technology people. And, you know, the ideas can flow. I think there's a project on the internet that is like a human genome project where they're matching scientists with, you know, with artists that's advancing science. I think if you really marry technology and art together, the possibilities are just wide open.
Mayor, any thoughts about the subject of who has to be involved and how are we going to get there and what's going to keep us from getting there?
You have to develop relationships in order to move art forward in your community, and getting rid of the fragmentation is very important. I'm really proud that in Gwinnett we have Artworks Gwinnett, that is an organization that is bringing these art nonprofit groups together so we can work together and plan together and have a vision together and support each other. We really want art to be very popular in Gwinnett. I want people to drive to Duluth and then go ahead and go to Swanee and Norcross and see Mayor Bucky. We want our area to be a destination of art. So relationships are key. Of course, businesses are very important. We are installing a piece of public art in Duluth, and AGCO has donated the entire $100,000 for this piece of art. And it's all because we've had a relationship with AGCO for years. So they were interested in the quality of our community. And then I want to also focus on these grassroots organizations, such as the Duluth Fine Art League. As small and as simple as that sounds, they have gotten people excited about the arts in Duluth. And we had over 100 people come last week when we unveiled a maquette. So I think these grassroots organizations can get people very excited. And then, of course, the government. And being that I'm mayor now, I see how important my role is to make sure that art is at the table. I can help get ordinances in places, such as through our Duluth Public Art Commission. We now have an ordinance in place where businesses can contribute a percentage to public art. So there are definitely many things that you can do, and I think it all goes back to developing relationships.
Okay, we're about to begin. We've got a couple of folks with wireless mics. Tamara is on that corner back there, and Kane, you are a runner up here. So if you have questions, sort of gravitate toward the aisles, and we'll ask them. I know one of the questions you're going to ask is, how can I get Nancy Harris to move to my town and be mayor? So that's the first thing you want to know. But let me ask Carol. Is your mic on, Carol? Is it?
Good question.
Let's see. It's probably a button up on the top. We need to get somebody from Turner down here to look at this microphone. And
I'll make a call.
It's on.
All right, great. So let me ask you a question. Do you have any questions for the panel? You listen to them. Something that has occurred to you that maybe the panelists can answer?
Well, I was really struck by a number of things that the panelists said, and I would ask you maybe one question. You're advocating for bringing artists to the table at the beginning, right, to make something richer, a better idea. I think one of the challenges in doing that is some of the ones you mentioned, but also the fact that sometimes artists come to the table, or arts organizations, nonprofit arts organizations come to the table and with their hand out. So in other words, it becomes a money discussion right up front, which I think is problematic, and in some ways becomes the reason that they're brought in last. Have you had situations where you felt like artists? Can you cite examples of times when artists were really full partners in the conversation, as civic partners, if you will, and then the money discussion was delayed?
Who are you asking?
Yes.
Good.
All right, let me make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
Have there been times where we've had discussion about the need of art without discussing how we're going to pay for it?
Well, I wasn't real clear, and I apologize for that. But I think, one of the things I'm continually admonishing artists about, and our grantees, is don't come to every civic discussion with your hand out, because it sort of puts you in a different category. Come as a civic player, just as others around the table are coming as civic players. Come as an equal. Don't come as a supplicant. And then you get, and then the hope is you get treated like an equal, right? So yeah, ultimately somebody gets paid for the work, but the question is, can we plan together as equals, not as supplicant, and patron? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Elvis, thank you very much. My Memphis coming out in me. So that's the question.
So if you start with us and not me,
Yeah.
your artists are going to get further. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's something we had a lot. We convened for the first time all of our grantees in January in Miami, and that was very much a focus of the discussion, is how can artists be better civic players when they come to the table, so that they become part of the civic group. And there's a group that we funded, Trey McIntyre Project in Boise, Idaho, that's done a phenomenal job of that. There's a new book out about Trey McIntyre company, and we need to see more examples of that.
So the great question for the panel: is there any reason artists can't be civic players in these conversations? Can see the civic good? No reason at all.
No, I don't think
once
so.
in the conversation,
The passion needs to be the first thing, the passion for the project and a clear criteria of what you want. You should, maybe it's setting the expectations right up front, where in line that conversation falls, and maybe having a clear idea of what a budget is before the artist is even talked to, so that they, you're having a different kind of conversation with them. I think the idea should be the starting point of any discussion with an artist.
We're doing a lot of visionary planning and discussing now, and when you're doing visionary planning, I don't allow people to talk about money. We're talking about the vision, and we're talking about what we want to look like and be like and feel like. And then we worry about how we're going to pay for it. So absolutely, artists are at our table, and they are a very balanced part of the conversation.
And I think now that the ARC has picked up a philosophy that arts and culture didn't need to be wrapped into their thinking, the current ALMA class, the Arts Leader Metro Atlanta class, is being exposed to traditional ARC issues like transportation and healthcare and other factors. And so to, in fact, get some of the creative thinking from the arts leaders and the members of government and business that are part of that panel. So now you get a lot of juices flowing in a creative idea. And again, you don't want to be constrained by money when you're trying to come up with a vision. You worry about that later on when you try to execute. So let's not, get the things too murky.
yeah.
I've been sitting here thinking about the premise, and I think I agree with you, Carol. I also think that there is a reality that we have to face as an organization that works with teaching artists and has read studies about how teaching artists piece together their living, 3-4 jobs that add up to $25,000 with no health insurance. When I'm at the planning table, I'm earning a salary for it. When a teaching artist is at the planning table, they often aren't. So I think that's just a reality. There's a power dynamic in our relationship that I think we can help think about different ways to pay artists for all of their time and their opportunities to think about how to do that.
Okay. Great. So let's start some questions here. Who has a question? This is
here.
all right. Well, if you can sort of move toward in some way move toward the aisles. Yeah, we have a question in the back.
Yes. Hi, my name is Heather, and I think this is perhaps an observation that's leading to a question, but it's resulted from y'all's
Yeah,
conversation.
this is like Jeopardy. It does have to be framed in the form of questions.
Yes.
So.
So one thing that I think I'm from Atlanta, and I think Atlanta lacks the notion that art doesn't have to be just an event. It's not necessarily always something that has to be a scheduled thing that you decide as a family, are we going to do this event? So and maybe because I'm a transportation planner and I work in the public realm, that I think about that. But to me, one of the things that's unique about some of the areas that seem to be thriving in Atlanta, I live in Castleberry, and there's so much art that's not about an event. It just happenstance, or it's organic in the street or something like that. So this question may be for Carol, because maybe it's examples from other places, but perhaps some of y'all have seen it in other places. What are some really good examples of organic, non-event-like art or creativity in the public space? Have you seen any really wonderful, besides parklets, I can think of that as an example, but is there anything else, maybe Carol or some of the other
So the
folks?
question is there a really great example of the sort of organic art that just emerges?
That's just in that public space, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily an event.
What's your favorite spaces?
Well, you know, I would, one thing I would do is encourage you to look at the artplaceamerica.org website, because we've got blog entries from everyone, monthly blog entries actually, from every one of our grantees. And we're about to announce a new 54 new grantees in just a few weeks. So there's a lot of material there. You know, I can think about I'll go back to the work that Trey McIntyre has done in Boise. It's interesting, there's one of the things that we don't, and I won't make this long, but there's a organization, there's a ballet company in Denver, Colorado, which is in that odd kind of triangle, no man's land that is near the stadium that just has never, it's very disinvested. And the ballet company decided they would move their studios from the suburbs, actually, to this location. It is has windows in the front into the studio, just like the Miami City Ballet windows onto their studio used to be on Lincoln Road in its earliest days. And what they're doing is every day at 5 o'clock, they invite the public to come in and enjoy a glass of wine and see what the ballet company has made that day. If I could get every arts organization doing that, in other words, using exactly what they have, you know, no extra cost, to invite the public in, to make that an active space for the public, I think it would be fabulous. So more of that kind of thing is, I think it has huge potential.
Anybody have some favorite place in Atlanta?
Well, you know, there's the Living Walls project, which I believe is around the Sweet Auburn district, and that's an amazing project where, you know, areas are being revitalized by this amazing graffiti work, and there are artists coming in from all over the world to paint and decorate walls, and it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, the Glow ATL dance company that has site-specific, you know, just random dance happenings is also something I think is wildly exciting when, you know, they break into dance at the mall or at the MARTA station. I mean, that's thrilling.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing about Glow ATL, but you know, we know it's important to build and sustain great arts institutions in our cities, but we all know that the greatest cities have the art on the street. And I think there's a lot of that happening in Atlanta that's very exciting between our festivals and Flux projects and, you know, seeing Glow ATL all around town and other organizations. So I think that is a pretty rich opportunity for us.
Kane?
Hello.
Yes. Could you stand?
Sure.
Thank you.
I am a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and I just had this conversation.
Do you play an instrument by any chance?
I am a visual artist, if anything,
all
with
right.
digital media is my specialty. I had a meeting with community leaders at the historic West Side Cultural Arts Council. And one of the things first thing they did when I went there was they had to map out kind of how all the different Georgia Tech projects sort of fed into me. In terms of running a project with them in 2014. And the one thing that wasn't on the map was the Historic West Side Cultural Arts Council. And this is actually supporting a little bit what Carol said, because this is actually around getting funding for a project. So my question to them was, what will happen if you didn't get that funding? And these projects didn't run, and you still wanted to do that, and they looked panicked for a second. And within a few minutes, began to start thinking about things that the community offers now without any funding or anything that they do, Black History Month or various other things that could actually be used, that they could use to drive people to that community, which became a different conversation. A conversation about what they bring as opposed to what I bring or what Georgia Tech brings. And now they can know what to offer when they are asking to be a part on the table of planning. They bring what they, what the historic West Side brings, not what others bring to them.
I see.
And that was an important shift for this conversation, because now they can plan. And now they know they can ask for resources outside of Georgia Tech and in other ways.
Well, this is a little bit of a combination of what Dave was saying, which is there's a lot going on out there. We just don't know enough about what's going on out there. And what Carol was saying, which is, how do we begin to get people in conversation about it, not as patrons and supplicants, but as we're all bringing something here. We're all contributing something to making this work. So, or is there a question there, or do?
Well, the idea of being an equal player,
Okay.
so that this community is not asked. They do need resources, obviously, but they're coming to the table as a player, not as we are getting served or we are getting resources, but we have a resource. We're an important resource. And I think that shift is extremely important, especially in areas in Atlanta that don't get a lot of resources currently.
And it sounds like they've made that shift in Duluth. That is, they sort of get the contribution that the artists. Any other thoughts on what was just said?
Well, this is all part of this, what I'll call the virtuous cycle, that street art, festivals, fairs, cultural events creates an opportunity to engage quality of life. People want quality of life. So it's interesting, I see Renee Blumenthal from the Chamber here. They were for many years trying to attract businesses here for many reasons. And suddenly the realization is it's harder and harder to attract new businesses. What about the businesses we already have here? So maintaining the quality of life for the employers, the employees, how that overlaps into what I call, again, the virtuous trifecta: quality of life, quality education, and then quality arts and culture. So suddenly this can all be a multiplier effect as opposed to being fragmented and competing with each other. And I think we just need more and more examples like this, where these communities do something, we recognize it within our own world, and so we then engage others to try and do more of the same thing.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions, and there's one in the back, I believe.
Thanks. Good morning. Chuck Meadows. And first of all, very inspired by your insightful comments, and give a lot of room for optimism, and appreciate the panel and the moderator and the keynote speaker pointing that out. My question, as we're having this
Chuck is
conversation...
the coolest guy in Atlanta, by the way.
Oh, wow.
So, a very discerning eye here.
Checks in the mail, Otis. I appreciate it. The question I have is, we're having this conversation about art and placemaking. Two unique sort of features or characteristics. I won't call them challenges, but two features or characteristics that we face in Metro Atlanta. One is our push our historical push to shed that image of the Old South and to be this modern city, and to sort of reinvent our own image. And it caused us to tear down some historic buildings and pave over streetcar tracks and do things that we thought would sort of create this image of a modern city that wasn't mired by some of the problems of the Old South. And two, the fact that we've done such a great job at attracting people from other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And so we've got this population now that is made up of folks that come from a lot of different places. And so I guess I'd like to get, with all the expertise and the perspective that we have on this panel, how do we address those two characteristics as we're trying to use art to make a place? The fact that historically we haven't sort of held on to our image that sort of created us, or we haven't sort of maintained those ties to the historical Atlanta, and the fact that now we have this great fabric or quilt of people that's made up of folks that come from all over the place, not just the South or not just Atlanta. As we're having this conversation about placemaking here, how do we address those characteristics and what we're trying to accomplish?
Can I just alter that a little bit? It sounds like what you're saying, Chuck, is we've had a problem with organic for a while. We didn't kind of like organic. We wanted new, and we wanted different. And, can we have a great arts community if we depend so much on people who didn't grow up here and aren't reflective of this community and its roots? I'm not sure that's exactly the question, but it sounds like an interesting one.
Let me just give a couple of examples that I think are relevant. One is the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago is funding organizations that are reflective of the immigrant population in Chicago, which is substantial. And they're doing it in a programmatic way that makes it really exciting. They're providing enough marketing money to reach out beyond a traditional audience for each of them. And I think what Chicagoans are discovering is the richness in those cultures. So it's really fun to get a look at immigrant culture through the arts, and doing a fantastic job. I also think about what Atlanta did, the Light Box Theater in Atlanta, which put together a number of international residencies at the Light Box, but also took Atlanta organizations and sent them to international locations. So it became this fantastic exchange of Atlanta artists going elsewhere, and then international artists, I mean, did I say Miami? I don't know where I am today. Miami artists going to international locations and vice versa. And so it made, again, for this very rich exposure to culture. It was great for the arts organizations. It was great for the city, which fashions itself an international city. So that, you know, those are a couple of examples that I can think of that address the second part of your question. I think the first part of your question, you know, I understand the organic is uncomfortable, and it's very interesting. I don't want to take too much time, but it's interesting to me how many places we'll get a grant from, and this is my hometown all over, but we'll get a grant from a town and they'll say, well, Johnny Cash cut his first record here, or you know, B.B. King lived here. And it's like, nobody cares. I mean, you know, it just, I think you have to admit when, I know this is heresy, so shoot me now, but I think you have to admit when history no longer matters. And those places, those towns, those leaders would be so much better off thinking forward and thinking of a forward-leaning vision for what the town could be, instead of sort of trying to hang on to these snatches of history that just have no meaning anymore for people. And I think they do it in lieu of having a vision for the future. And that's lazy thinking, in my opinion. So there, shoot me
Barbara
now.
looks like she wants to comment on this, but she is trying to think. I'm too polite, so jump in here and comment.
Well, it goes back to our culture of storytelling for me. You know, I think encouraging great storytelling, visual, oral. You know, at Turner, we've got the Turner Voices initiative, which is about empowering the next generation of, you know, writers and directors and speakers. And I think, you know, what I got out of what you asked was, you know, how do we keep alive, you know, the stories that make us who we are now, but also take us into the future. And I think encouraging storytelling, you know, at all levels is a really positive and powerful way to do that.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes. So you have the final question.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a tough position.
It's an honor. So
It is. It's quite an honor. Hi, I'm David Weiss. I'm on the board of a theater company here in Atlanta. I don't want to mention the name because I don't want it to be specific to my theater company, although we do have a specific plan, and we have done a lot of what you've described here in terms of it's organic, it's supported by the artistic director, who unfortunately, he's an actor, so you can't wake him up this early. But we've been working on it for about 6 or 7 years. We have land for it. We have an architectural design. Our architect is right there, Mike Sizemore, who does a wonderful job. We've spoken to civic leaders here. We've spoken to funders. Everyone likes the idea, but we've gotten to the point after 6 or 7 years, it's a money discussion. So you said, don't make it the money. Well, we have the plan, and the idea is to create something that would be like a middle market for the theaters here. We have one big theater, here we are at it, and we have many little theaters. Let's create a venue and a place for the middle market of theaters here in Atlanta.
So your question is, where did we get
What's
the money?
the next? No, well, what would be the next step? The money is the question, but it doesn't have to be we're not there with our hands out. It is, what's the next step? What do we do next?
Okay, so, all right, this is like a ULI panel that visits another city and advises it. So give some advice. Dave?
Well, a thought comes to mind is, there's a lot of fixed asset tied up in this building, and if you look at the total number of nights, days that there's orchestra, theater, it's less than half. So I would suspect in most venues, there is capacity that you could share. And I think the arts community, if they'll collaborate more, might find that there's many ways to have multiple troops, outfits, whatever, in a single venue. So that's a starting point. So now you get more bang for the physical buck that you've had to build. And I think this, again, is an organic solution. When you don't have the money, find other ways of delivering your message by sharing. And again, I know arts organizations are already good at that, and yet I think there's even more that can be done in that kind of space.
So your suggestion is, before they get too much further, talk to other groups that might be able to use the facility. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Either use yours if you build it, or use theirs while you're building.
Other thoughts? Well, thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for this panel? I think, unless there's something else to be said here, we are dismissed.